At my sister's wedding, beneath the white silk tent in the Hamptons, my father didn't offer a toast. He offered a verdict. He tapped his crystal glass, silencing 300 of New York's elite, and smiled that shark-like smile I knew too well. $150 million, he announced, his voice booming. A historic sale for Sterling Properties. And Maria. He paused, locking eyes with me. You get nothing. The laughter rippled through the crowd. Cruel and expensive. My sister smirked. My mother looked down. I should have been devastated. Instead, I took a slow sip of champagne and smiled. Because he didn't know who had signed that check. But I did. If your own father humiliated you in front of 300 people, would you run away? Or would you stay and fight, drop a comment and tell me your move? I want to know who's listening right now. That laughter at the wedding? The sound of 300 people amused by my public execution. It wasn't new to me. It was an echo. A sound that had been bouncing off the walls of my life for as long as I could remember. Standing there with my champagne glass. I didn't feel the sting of the moment. I felt the ghost of a memory from 12 years ago. The day I learned that in the Sterling family, softness was a sin punishable by fire. I was 16 years old. I had spent 6 months working on a portfolio. While other girls were worrying about prom dresses or driver's licenses, I was obsessed with structural engineering. I had designed a concept for a sustainable housing complex that used rainwater harvesting and passive solar heating. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a blueprint for a better way to build. I believed, with the naive arrogance of a child who still thinks her parents are heroes, that this would finally make my father look at me. I walked into his library. The room always smelled like old leather and expensive scotch. Bradley was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, reviewing contracts for a new high-rise. I remember my hands shaking as I laid the sketchbook down in front of him. I didn't say a word. I just waited. He flipped through the pages, his face unreadable. I held my breath, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. He stopped on a rendering of a vertical garden. He didn't look at me. He just laughed. It was a hollow sound. This is what you've been doing, he asked. I nodded. My voice stuck in my throat. He closed the book. This isn't architecture, Maria. This is gardening. It's weak. It's feminine. Sterling Properties builds monuments to power, not greenhouses for hippies. He stood up, walked over to the fireplace, where a log was crackling, and tossed my sketchbook onto the grate. He didn't throw it with anger. He threw it with indifference, like he was discarding a gum wrapper. I watched the edges of the paper curl and blacken. 6 months of work. My dreams. My voice. All of it turning to ash in seconds. I looked at my mother, Dana. She was sitting in the corner, reading a magazine. She saw him do it. She saw the tears welling up in my eyes. She didn't say a word. She just turned the page. For years, I wondered why I didn't scream, why I didn't run over and pull the book out of the fire, why I just stood there and let him destroy a piece of me. But now I understand. You see, there is a trap in normalizing cruelty. When you grow up in a house where love is a transaction and respect is a weapon, you lose your baseline for reality. You start to believe that the abuse is your fault. You think that if you had just drawn straighter lines, if you had just used more concrete and less glass, he wouldn't have burned it. You don't realize that the game is rigged. You don't realize that to a narcissist. Your brilliance isn't a gift. It's a threat. I internalized that fire. I let it burn a hole through my confidence. I thought I was the one who was broken. I thought my vision was weak. But standing at that wedding, watching him laugh at me again. I realized something. He didn't burn my book because it was bad. He burned it because he was terrified. He recognized talent that he couldn't control. And his only instinct was to destroy it. But he made a mistake. He thought fire would turn me into ash. He didn't know that fire also hardens steel. That day in the library didn't kill the architect in me. It just taught her to build in the dark, where he couldn't see the blueprints until it was too late. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't leave a note. I just walked out of the library, past the fireplace, where my future was still smoldering, and out the front door. I walked until the gravel of the driveway turned into the asphalt of the highway. And I didn't look back. I had $40 in my pocket, and a rage that felt cold and heavy, like a stone in my gut. I moved into a basement apartment in Queens that smelled of damp concrete and boiled cabbage. It was a far cry from the Hamptons, but it was mine. By day, I worked as an administrative assistant for a mid-sized construction firm. I filed invoices, checked permits, and made coffee for men who thought they knew everything about building just because they wore hard hats. They didn't know I was memorizing their supply chains. They didn't know I was learning the price of steel, the cure time of concrete, and the loopholes in city zoning laws. By night, I became someone else. I studied structural engineering until my eyes blurred. I devoured textbooks on urban planning and real estate law. And I created Vanguard Holdings. It wasn't a glass-walled office in Manhattan. It was a laptop sitting on a milk crate in a room with no windows. But on paper, Vanguard was a force. It was a shell company designed to do one thing: hunt. I needed a face for this new entity. A mask that could move in worlds where Maria Sterling would be dismissed. So, I invented Elena Vance. Elena wasn't the daughter who got her sketchbook burned. Elena was a shark. She was cold, efficient, and utterly unsentimental. Through Elena, I started making moves. I didn't go after his skyscrapers. I couldn't afford them yet. Instead, I went after the dirt. I bought the buffer zones, the narrow strips of land between his luxury developments and the main roads, the drainage easements he ignored because he thought they were worthless. To Bradley, land was only valuable if you could put a penthouse on it. To me, land was control. I used zoning laws like a scalpel. I realized that if I owned a 10-foot strip of land in the right spot, I could block a 50-story tower's access to the sewage main. I could hold up a permit for 18 months just by filing a noise complaint on a property line he didn't even know I shared. I became the ghost in his machine. Projects stalled. Costs skyrocketed. Investors got nervous. And the whole time, Bradley was screaming at his lawyers to find out who was sabotaging him, never suspecting it was the girl he thought was useless. People ask why I did it this way. Why I didn't just sue him or confront him. They don't understand the psychology of the survivor. There is an invisible chain that binds you to your abuser long after you leave the house. It's a silent, heavy weight that tells you that direct confrontation is suicide. You learn that if you scream, they will just scream louder. If you fight, they will crush you. So you learn to move in the silence. You learn that the only way to break the chain is to become something they don't recognize. Silence wasn't my weakness, it was my camouflage. It was the dark room where I developed the negatives of his destruction. I wasn't hiding from him. I was waiting. I was letting him build his tower of arrogance brick by brick, knowing that I owned the ground it stood on. For 5 years, I was a phantom. I watched my sister Alyssa become an influencer, posting photos of a life funded by debt. I watched my mother host galas in a house that was slowly leveraging itself into oblivion. And I watched Bradley grow desperate. He needed a big sale. He needed a lifeline. He needed to sell Sterling Properties. And when he finally put the empire on the market, I knew it was time for Elena Vance to make an offer. Due diligence. To most people, it's just legal jargon for boring paperwork. To me, it's an autopsy. As Elena Vance, the mysterious buyer behind Vanguard Holdings, I had unrestricted access to the internal organs of Sterling Properties. My father thought he was handing over a shiny, profitable empire. He didn't know he was handing me the evidence of his own incompetence. He had surrounded himself with yes-men in expensive suits, MBAs who knew how to leverage debt but didn't know the difference between rebar and conduit. They looked at spreadsheets and saw profit. I looked at spreadsheets and saw physics. And physics doesn't lie. I was reviewing the cost reports for the new Midtown luxury tower. The numbers looked clean on the surface. Perfectly balanced. But then I looked at the materials log. There was an invoice for 3,000 tons of high-grade structural steel delivered in February. I stopped. I pulled up the site reports from that month. February had been a blizzard. The site had been shut down for 3 weeks. You can't deliver steel to a site that's buried in 4 feet of snow. You can't pour concrete when the ground is frozen solid. The money had gone out. But the steel had never arrived. I dug deeper. I traced the vendor. Apex Supply Solutions. A generic name. A P.O. box in Delaware. And a registered agent that led back to a holding company. It took me 4 hours of forensic accounting to peel back the layers. When I finally found the signatory on the bank account, I didn't gasp. I just stared at the screen. A cold smile touching my lips. Trevor Haldeman. My sister Alyssa's perfect fiancé. The venture capitalist who was supposedly bringing fresh energy to the family business? He wasn't bringing energy, he was draining the blood. He had been creating fake invoices for phantom materials, steel, glass, marble, and siphoning the cash into his own accounts. $8.2 million. He was cannibalizing the company to fund the very lifestyle my father admired. It was poetic. Really. My father had rejected me because I was a technician, a girl who cared about the details of how things were built. He preferred Trevor, the big picture visionary. And because he didn't understand the technical side of his own business, he couldn't see that his visionary was robbing him blind. My competence was the only thing that could catch his corruption. My phone buzzed. It was a courier notification. A physical letter had arrived at my apartment in Queens. I knew what it was before I opened it. The wedding invitation. It was heavy. Cream-colored cardstock. Embossed with gold leaf. But it wasn't the invitation itself that made my blood run cold. It was the insert card. A handwritten note from my mother. Maria. We've made an exception to include you. Please note that due to the high-profile nature of the guest list, you will be seated in the overflow section near the kitchen service entrance. Please wear muted colors gray or beige so you don't distract from the photography. Do not approach the VIP tables. I held the card in my hand. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons to be invisible. They wanted me there as a prop. A silent witness to their glory. Tucked away near the trash cans so I wouldn't ruin the aesthetic. They were worried about me distracting from the photography. I looked back at my computer screen. At the wire transfer logs that proved their golden boy was a thief. They were worried about the wrong thing. They were worried about the color of my dress. While the foundation of their entire life was rotting away beneath them. I didn't tear up the invitation. I placed it carefully on my desk. Right next to the file labeled, Haldeman Fraud. I would go to the wedding. I would wear their muted colors. I would sit by the kitchen. And I would bring the one thing they never expected me to have, the truth. The laughter was still rolling through the tent. A wave of expensive perfume and cruelty. When I decided it was time, my father stood on the stage. Chest puffed out. basking in the applause of people who only liked him because they thought he was rich. He looked at me with that familiar mix of pity and disdain. The look reserved for a dog that's been kicked but refuses to run away. I didn't smash my glass. I didn't flip the table. I just stood up. In a room full of people fighting for attention. Silence is the loudest noise you can make. I stood there. Calm. Smooth. In the muted gray dress my mother had requested, so I wouldn't distract from the bride. I waited. One by one. The heads turned. The laughter died down, replaced by a confused murmur. Why was the failure standing up? Was she going to make a scene? Was she going to cry? I picked up my champagne flute and took a step toward the stage. The click of my heels on the parquet floor cut through the quiet like a metronome. Who is the buyer? Dad? I asked. My voice wasn't loud. But it carried. It was the voice I used in boardrooms, when I was telling a contractor his concrete mix was substandard. It was a voice that expected to be heard. Bradley blinked. Caught off guard. He leaned into the microphone. His smile tight. Sit down. Maria. This isn't about you. I took another step. You said you sold the company for $150 million. A historic deal. I just want to know who signed the check. He chuckled. Playing to the crowd. He wanted to show them he was benevolent. Tolerant of his difficult daughter. It's a private equity firm. Maria. Vanguard Holdings. They're a global consortium. Serious people. Not that you would know anything about that world. Vanguard Holdings. I let the name hang in the air. It sounded impressive. Powerful. Faceless. And who is the signatory for Vanguard? I asked. He sighed. His patience wearing thin. The CEO. Elena Vance. She's a brilliant woman. Ruthless. She sees value where others don't. Now sit down before you embarrass yourself further. I stopped at the edge of the dance floor. I looked him dead in the eye. I looked at my mother, whose hand was trembling over her mouth. I looked at Alyssa, who looked bored. Elena Vance doesn't exist. Dad. The room went dead silent. The kind of silence you feel in your teeth. Vance. I continued. My voice steady. It's an anagram. Take the letters of my middle name. Rearrange them. Elena Vance is just a shell. A ghost I built to walk through doors you locked me out of. Bradley's face went from annoyed to pale. What are you talking about? I am Vanguard. I said. I didn't shout it. I stated it. A fact. Like gravity. I beckoned to the back of the room. The service doors swung open. But it wasn't a waiter with more champagne. It was Marcus. My lead counsel. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than the wedding cake. And he was carrying a leather portfolio. He walked straight to me and handed me the file. I opened it. The pages were crisp. Flagged with yellow sticky notes, where Bradley's signature was still wet. You didn't just sell the company. Dad. I said, flipping the page. You sold the debt. You were leveraged at 400%. You needed this sale to cover the construction loans you defaulted on in March. The bridge loans you took out in June. I pulled out the promissory notes. I bought them all. Every bad decision. Every cut corner. Every loan you took to keep up appearances while the foundation rotted. I own the banknotes. Bradley. Which means I don't just own sterling properties. I looked up from the papers. The shark smile was gone from his face. He looked old. He looked terrified. I own you. The room was frozen. No one moved. No one breathed. They were witnessing a murder. But there was no blood. Only ink. You can't. He whispered. The microphone picking up the tremor in his voice. You're You're nothing. I closed the portfolio with a snap. I am the architect you fired. I am the engineer you mocked. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, I am your landlord. This tent, this estate, it's company property. And you didn't get a permit for this event. I turned to the crowd, raising my glass one last time. So, to answer your question, Dad, $75 million. You're right. I don't get that. I kept it. Because I was the one paying it. But I wasn't done. The debt was just the demolition permit. Now came the wrecking ball. I nodded to the AV technician in the back of the tent, a kid I'd hired 2 hours ago for $500 cash. The lighting shifted. The romantic slideshow of Alyssa and Trevor's courtship that had been playing on the massive LED screens behind the stage flickered and died. In its place, a spreadsheet appeared. It wasn't romantic. It was a grid of raw data. Magnified to 10 feet tall. Transaction logs. Vendor IDs. Bank routing numbers. The room gasped. A collective intake of breath that sounded like the air being sucked out of the tent. Alyssa, I said, turning to my sister. She was frozen, her face pale against the white of her dress. You always wanted to know how Trevor could afford this lifestyle. The cars. The loft in Tribeca. This ring. I pointed to the screen. Meet Apex Supply Solutions. Trevor lunged forward. Turn it off. Turn it off right now. But security, my security, stepped in his path. He bounced off a chest the size of a retaining wall. Apex is a shell company. I explained to the room. My voice calm. Clinical. Registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. Sole beneficiary Trevor Haldeman. Over the last 3 years, Sterling Properties paid Apex $8.2 million for high-grade structural steel and imported marble. I clicked a button on a remote I'd pulled from my clutch. The screen changed to a site photo. A muddy, empty lot. This is the site where those materials were supposedly delivered last month. It's empty. The steel doesn't exist. The marble is a ghost. I looked at Trevor. He was sweating, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. You didn't marry a venture capitalist. Alyssa, you married a parasite. He's been eating the company from the inside out to buy you shiny things. Alyssa looked at Trevor. She didn't scream. She just took a step back, looking at the diamond on her finger like it was a tumor. That's a lie, Trevor shouted, his voice cracking. Bradley. Tell them I'm a partner. Bradley didn't speak. He couldn't. He was staring at the numbers on the screen, doing the math in his head, realizing that the visionary he loved more than his own daughter had slit the throat of his empire. But the embezzlement is just money, I said, turning back to my father. Money can be recovered. Insurance covers theft. But what I'm about to show you, insurance doesn't cover this. I clicked the remote one last time. A document appeared on the screen. It was old. The paper yellowed in the scan. A deed. Grandma Eleanor died 12 years ago, I said. The silence in the room was now heavy, suffocating. We were all told she left the estate, this land we are standing on right now, to you, Dad, to the man of the house, because she believed in tradition. Bradley's face went from gray to white. But I found the original will in the safe deposit box you forgot to close when you sold the banknotes. The one dated 3 weeks before she died. I highlighted a paragraph on the screen. To my granddaughter, Maria, who understands that land is not for selling, but for keeping. I leave the Hamptons estate in its entirety. You forged the transfer. Dad, I said. You traced her signature. I had a handwriting expert verify it this morning. You didn't just steal my sketchbook. You stole my birthright. I walked closer to him. He was trembling now. A physical shaking that rattled the ice in the glasses on the table. You sold a company you bankrupted to buy back land you stole. I whispered. Loud enough for the microphone to catch. That's not just bad business. That's a state fraud. That's a felony. And since the sale documents you signed this morning included a warranty of title, you just committed federal wire fraud. I looked at Marcus. He was already on his phone. The police are at the gate, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tent. They're here for Trevor. But I think they'll want to talk to you too. Bradley. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Getting louder. Cutting through the salt air. The perfect wedding was over. The structure had failed. The roof was caving in. And there was nowhere left to hide. The sirens faded, taking the chaos with them. The police took Trevor in handcuffs. They took Bradley's phone and passport as evidence of flight risk. The guests vanished like smoke, terrified of the scandal sticking to their silk dresses. Within an hour, the tent was empty, save for the scattered chairs and the dying flowers. I stood on the lawn, the wind off the ocean tangling my hair. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a hurricane has leveled everything, leaving only the bedrock. My mother, Dana, was the last to leave. She stood by the gate, her face streaked with mascara, holding a bag of wedding favors like they could save her. She looked at me, not with the arrogance of the woman who watched my sketchbook burn, but with the desperation of a woman who just realized her meal ticket was canceled. Maria, she said, her voice trembling, we have nowhere to go. The accounts are frozen. The house. You can't really evict us. I looked at her. For years, I had craved her protection. I had wanted her to step between me and Bradley's fire. She never did. She had warmed her hands on the flames instead. You have 30 days, I said. That's standard legal notice. I suggest you use them to find a smaller apartment. She stepped closer, clutching my arm. But we're family. Blood is thicker than water. Maria, you can't just cut us off. It's unnatural. I pulled my arm away. It wasn't angry, it was just a reflex. Like pulling away from a hot stove. There is a lie we tell ourselves about biology. We think that sharing DNA creates an unbreakable contract. We think that walking away from the people who raised us is a sin. But sometimes, the most violent thing you can do is stay. Sometimes, the family tree is rotten at the root, and the only way to save the branch is to sever it. I'm not cutting you off to hurt you. Mom, I said, I'm cutting you off to save myself. I used to think my loyalty to you was a virtue. Now I realize it was just a lack of self-respect. You chose your side 12 years ago in that library. I'm just finally accepting your choice. She sobbed, calling me cruel, calling me cold. But I didn't feel cold. I felt light. I watched her walk down the driveway, a ghost of a life I used to pray for. And I didn't look back. The next morning, I walked into the headquarters of Sterling Properties, now Vanguard. I took the elevator to the top floor. I walked past the executive suite where Bradley used to drink scotch and intimidate contractors. I didn't sit in his chair. I had it removed. I brought in a drafting table. I placed it by the window, where the light was best. I unrolled a tube I had carried with me for 12 years. It was charred at the edges. The paper was brittle, smelling faintly of smoke. It was the only page I had managed to save from the fire that day. My design for the sustainable housing complex. I smoothed it out. The lines were still straight. The vision was still clear. I picked up a pen and started to draw. And I know there is someone listening to this right now who knows exactly what that fire feels like. You are the one they talk about in whispers. You are the one who sits at the edge of the table, biting your tongue, making yourself smaller so you don't disturb their picture. You think you are the spare part. You think you are invisible? I am writing this letter to you. They are wrong. You are not invisible, you are just underground. You are a seed waiting for the right season. Do not let them burn your blueprints. Do not let them convince you that your silence is weakness. Build in the dark. Learn the things they are too arrogant to learn. And when the time comes, do not ask for a seat at their table. Build your own. So I have to ask you, what blueprint are you hiding because someone told you it wasn't good enough? Tell me your story in the comments. Let's build something new. Together.